Welcome everyone to Audiobooks from Hell. I am your host, Sean DeRager. I am an audiobook narrator, and I do other things as well. I have other podcasts and stuff like that, but we're talking about audiobooks, books, horror, literature, all that kind of stuff on this podcast, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of stuff's near and dear to my heart, and very excited about today's guest. I did a little snippet in his anthology book, Land of Bones. So welcome to Audiobooks from Hell, Glenn Rolfe. Glenn.
Yo, what's happening?
Not much. Trying to make sure I do all this right. This is a lot. The whole video thing is new to me because I'm used to just doing the podcast version, and all the podcasts are moving over to video. So you always got to keep up
with the times.
So I figured I might as well mess with it. So this is episode number 2 of the video version. So anyway, those of you listening, you don't care. You're listening. You're listening on Spotify or whatever. So thanks for listening too. So Glenn, like I said when I introduced you, I did a little snippet on your anthology, Land of Bones. Fireside Horror put it out. They're a pretty new audiobook production company specializing in horror, and Joe Hempel runs that, and I interviewed Joe a while ago, I think even before he had this thing launched. So that's what was my introduction to you. I think, though, I'd seen your name around, and I think I'd seen you did another anthology-type book called Slush, and that cover is amazing. So your covers are always pretty fucking awesome. So that's a good horror writer always makes sure their covers are on point, in my opinion.
Yeah, you hope so. Like when the publisher has it, it's iffy. It can be.
I was about to say,
when you're self-publishing, it's you're in control and you make sure it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say if you're like Stephen King, he doesn't give a shit now.
Oh yeah, well, that's that too.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. We've chatted back and forth. We're both fans of punk rock. You're a musician in your own right as well. I'm a huge. I dabbled in singing, so we kind of have these. We have a lot of kind of our paths. Many things kind of are simpatico, as they say. So I'm really excited to talk to you about books and your writing and everything.
Cool.
So anyway, well, why don't we just dive into this and just like how did you? I'm always interested to see how a writer becomes a writer. And, these are the kind of questions that are, pretty standard for this kind of thing. But I think everyone's journey's fascinating because writing to me, like I've dabbled in writing, but there's no way, and I've said this before, that I can, I want to do it as a challenge to myself, but there's no way I can keep a long form type narrative going. When did you kind of get bit by the writing bug? When did that start, and kind of what was it about writing that you loved?
Well, for me, I started off as a songwriter. Mm-hmm. So in the bands that I started in like 97 playing in punk bands, and it was me and my bass player. We both split lyrics, but I'd write a song and then he'd write a song. I'd always come up with the chord progression or whatever. But after he left, I was in charge of doing all the lyrics for stuff. So I did that for, 10, 12 years, something like that. So I was kind of writing these little mini stories, anyways.
Right.
Some of my favorite ones were always kind of more lyrical or whatever, poetic kind of bits. Not all of it. It's punk rock. So there was songs about blow up dolls and stuff in there too. But yeah. And my band was called the Skin Flutes. So if that tells you anything.
Yeah. That's a very that's a fantastic punk rock name.
Yeah, it was so stupid, but it was awesome. I mean, we got stuck with it because I remember this isn't on writing, but the story's so funny. Like we were getting ready to play our first show. We had another guitar player. We fired him, and he had come up with the band's name that we had at that time. Mm-hmm. And well, I didn't feel comfortable using his name since we just threw him out of the band. But we had our first show coming up, and my buddy asked, "Well, you guys, he's the one that invited us to be on the bill." He was like, I need a name. What's the name?" And I think I threw out the Skin Flutes, just being an idiot. So that's what we were on that flyer, and then we went over so well at that first show that it just stuck with us. So that we couldn't change it after that. But
it happens.
So yeah, it's fun. And then so I did music for a bunch of years, got married, got divorced, and got married again, had started having kids. I ended up in back in my own hometown. Like I had this adventure getting away from this place. And then here I am back where
Yeah.
pretty much I grew up a couple streets over from where I am. And the band, the rest of the guys I played with and stuff were all in Portland, which is like an hour drive from here up in Maine. So it just became too much with kids to like spare that hour to drive down, 2 or 3 hours to practice, an hour to drive back. It was just too much. So I had to give that up. And then my hotel I worked at closed down. So I was a stay-at-home dad for, the foreseeable future at that time. And writing is all I ever knew, I always got anything I had that was in me or stuff I was witnessing. I just felt like the need to write all the time, and not having a band, it seemed pointless at the time for me to be writing songs. And I was reading horror. I started reading horror a lot around 2004, 5, 6, somewhere in there. And then I loved the leisure books horror titles. After King and Anne Rice, which is what I started on, then I found the Leisure Books Horror Club there, or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And just fell in love with all those crazy stories and all those crazy writers. And I think it was kind of like I scribbled these couple of short story ideas once, somewhere in the middle of playing in bands. I kind of just flirted with it a little bit. I think I read On Writing by Stephen King, and he had a couple of little exercises in there to try out, and I did, and I had a lot of fun with that. So I was sitting at home when my daughters were like taking their naps one day, and I'm like, I just pulled up this file because I had it, and I just started playing with it. And I said, I read it, and I said, this is not too bad, I kind of like this, and I don't have anything else to do right now, so I'm just gonna try to work this up and make it a chapter or whatever. I took that, I shared it on Facebook, in like a private group with a couple of horror reading buddies of mine, and they said, well, that was awesome, what happens next? That's how I started writing books.
Yeah, that's great.
I wrote it was like a short story, I thought, that turned out to be a chapter, and then I just started coming up with more for my friends, and eventually you get this, oh my god, I'm writing a book, it's happening. And it gets exciting, and it was fun writing that. It took me 3 or 4 months to write the first draft it was Blood and Rain, actually. It was that book that I started writing. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. And, every writer that I've talked to is a little bit different in their process. I was doing a little thing. So I'm narrating a book right now called Behind Blue Eyes. It's taking me forever. I'm almost there. I'm almost done. Yeah. But me and the author, Anna Masakat, have been kind of doing these things where she interviews me and then she directs me on video, just kind of testing all this out and messing around. And because she does sci-fi and fantasy type stories, she does a lot of outlining because there's character arcs that are going, like she writes in kind of like seasons, like as like almost like a television series. And I see that a lot with kind of science fiction and fantasy, but horror writers, and even horror movies and horror enthusiasts such as myself, we kind of lose interest in the same thing after a while. We want to kind of get in, have some splatter, some horror, some whatever, and get the fuck out. So it's a different kind of writing style. Do you outline and I think A.S. Coomer says he kind of, was it A.S. Coomer? Someone I interviewed, I think it was A.S. Coomer, says he kind of gets a bit of an outline and then writes. But I know there's other people, like, they just write, kind of see where the story goes. They have an idea, a seed. What's your kind of writing style like? Because there's not really a right or wrong way to write, as long, depending on, well, if the end product is shit, then you did it wrong, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, for me, I started off I'd get an idea for a scene. Mm-hmm. I won't know who these fucking characters are. Just get an idea for a scene and say, I have to put this down. And then hopefully it grows from there, and I kind of, at the beginning, I never knew if I was working on if there's going to be a book or a short story or whatever the length was going to be. It was going to be wherever it ended, I guess. You kind of get the idea partway through, but that's how I
Mm-hmm.
wrote the first bunch of books. And it wasn't until I started working with Flame Tree Press, that I finally tried to outline.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I always thought, yeah, you're going to know where everything is and you're not going to have all these fun discoveries when you're writing. But it's kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
You got to go through that process creating the outline. It was so exciting. I couldn't even believe it. When I finished, I felt like I'd just written a book, but it was like 10 pages of outline or whatever.
Right.
Um, so I've done both, and I still do both. And I don't know which one I prefer. I mean, working with an outline is less stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know where you've got to go. You just kind of set up points that you've got to hit.
Yeah.
I haven't
milestones.
gone as deep as setting up all these giant arcs with like multiple characters, like the fantasy kind of stuff. But there's always an arc in there anyways for a couple of the characters, but nothing too deep. But I mean, I like to write. My books are usually the novels that I write are about 250 pages. That's my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying, I like to get in and get out. I'll probably never write anything that's longer than that. I haven't yet. Every time I think, well, maybe the story ends. I'm like, no, this feels good.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of both, pantsing is what they would call it, pantsing and outlining. I enjoy both, and I think that outlining is a little bit easier just because it's less stressful.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I don't write, but I'm kind of like, there's things I'm taking notes in my head as I'm talking, doing these interviews, because I have a goal next year to try to do a novella, and maybe a couple short stories and see where they go. So we'll see, because I dabbled in writing, and in high school I wrote all the time. I had little short stories all the time, all fantasy horror type stuff. And because that was like the place, especially when I was younger, that was the place that I could go and really kind of create stories that you could be, because I was raised very, very religious. So, we couldn't watch certain things, we couldn't read certain things, although I did kind of, Stephen King was always in my backpack, or some book from the library. I would, because that no one can tell me I couldn't check out these books. So I'd peruse the horror section. But when I wrote, there was a freedom there, because it was my stuff, my story, and my voice. And if a character is going to swear right here. They're 13 years old, but he's going to swear. And I'm like, I have an excuse to put some swears in this thing, because that's what the kid would do, And I remember having conversations, with my mom, and because she kind of understood the creative aspect, and she's like, well, acting, acting's acting, and so that's not really sinful, I guess, if they're acting within reason, So I was like, okay, cool, I can get away with this. So
your mom read your stories.
I think she read a couple of them, and I hadn't. I mean, it was all stuff that I did for school, and I was always paranoid that my parents would find something, so I didn't have any kind of deep stash of like anything too risque. But But I mean, so you started writing stories kind of later, like, so when you're in your band days, you were writing songs, but that was kind of a good warm up to writing stories. And I know there's singer songwriters and stuff, and punk rock's different. A little bit, but there's some singer-songwriters that write these kind of concept albums. They'll write in story. They'll David Bazan is like that. If you've heard David Bazan, Page of the Lion, his albums, the Page of the Lion stuff is very much a story. What things did you draw from? Did you draw from anything from your lyric writing as you started writing? Did that help you and inform you at all, or was it just kind of, or not?
Yeah, I think I noticed that, like, if I, for some reason, open up my own book for whatever reason and kind of peek through things, sometimes I'll go back and look at some of my older work and just check it out. Like, I don't know why, just randomly will do it, but I'll come across a line that's like either a line from a song that I've written that I kind of somehow weaved into the prose or whatever. Make it's some of it's like and I've had people call it out as, well, there's some real poetic stuff going on, or lyrical, like they get it, like they get that lyrical a little bit. And I think I did that more in the beginning, in my first couple of books, because I never graduated high school. I got my GED or whatever, and I went to college a little bit, but online. But I never got. I've always felt like I'm not qualified to do this. I've thought that from the get.
The good old imposter syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as a young writer, when I first started, I was in my early 30s when I started actual writing. And I remember, especially with the first draft of Blood and Rain, really trying, like, using a thesaurus to, like, make it sound better, make myself sound more like a writer, like using words that I don't normally use. And I was lucky. I had an editor. I paid a guy to edit it, and that was the main takeaway from his edit, was like, you don't need to do that.
Right.
He goes, and one thing, you're like, if you're reading the rest of your stuff, and I'm really into it, and then you can tell when you've tried too hard in a spot. You don't need to do that. And when he said you don't need to do that, I was just like, fuck. Well, hey, that's a weight off my shoulders. I can just relax and just write in my own voice constantly.
Exactly. And and
but I didn't think it was good enough at the time.
Yeah. And I see that. I see a lot of authors think that, like, well, I need to be, I need to channel Shakespeare, or I need to channel, or even I need to channel Stephen King, or I need to channel Anne Rice. But no, like, the great thing about anything creative is it's your voice. I mean, there is skill involved. There is, you do grow over time. You do find your voice. But that's the freeing thing I think about art, is it is your voice, and that's why I always feel like when I'm an audiobook narrator, I'm a bit of a hack, because I'm just narrating what's being written. But there is a creativity into the narration as well, because I am interpreting, the writer's words and their characters, in my own voice. And no one else talks like me. If I try to talk like someone else, if I try to be like throw out a big name, Scott Brick, you're going to tell. People want to hear me, tell a story, because that's my personality. So my whole thing has been trying to get my personality to shine through more and more. So let's talk into audiobooks here, because we have Fireside Horrors producing your audiobooks. Land of Lost Bones, right?
Land of Bones.
Land of Bones. I keep wanting to put Lost in there for some reason. Whenever
Land
I
of the Lost.
Land. I think that's what it is.
Yes.
Land of Bones. I mean, that thing, that audiobook, and I got asked to do a snippet of it. And it was the one, I forget the title, but it involved vampires in high school. There's a high school football field.
Yeah, it's not Kansas anymore.
Not Kansas anymore. But I mean, this audiobook, man, you got Matt Godfrey, and he did the novella that was in that, right?
Yeah, he did.
Oh my God! So Travis Baldry, Gary Bennett, Kurt Bonham. I mean, Kelsey Navarro. It's Joe Hempel. It's like this, like, all these names. I was like, holy shit! I can't believe I'm even like a snippet of this thing. But was that your first experience with an audiobook of your work? And
no. It's weird. There's a lot, like, the audio history I've got is when I was with Sam Hain, who put out my first two novellas, and then Blood and Rain, the original version edition of Blood and Rain. They near the end of their stint of being a publisher, they signed a deal with Audio Realms, I think it was.
Okay.
Was a company, and they did my novellas. Abram's Bridge and Boomtown. So there are copies of those, or recordings of those, and I have no idea who has them now, who's got the rights, what happened to them. I don't know if the narrators got paid. I don't know anything about it. I wish I did, because I heard them both and they were both awesome.
Yeah.
And then, so Blood and Rain it missed because Sam Hain fell apart, so never got the audio treatment. And then Joe was getting into the audio book business. Originally, I think it was towards near the beginning of when he started messing with it.
Right.
And he was one of my early readers. He saw like the first couple of things I put out and got into it. And me and him became friends pretty quick with him doing reviews of my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He did Slush. There's an
Okay.
audiobook for Slush out there. It's got a different cover. It doesn't have that crazy colorful cover, but it's got a different cover. But Joe did that, and I just remember more so with the short stories that he was reading. I remember he did one that's a really short piece. Like it's like I don't know if it's a 1,000 words or less or whatever. I was listening to his audio of it, and I just got completely caught up in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know where the hell it was going, but like his listening to him tell it, it's
Yeah.
like you said, he's putting his own spin on it by
Totally.
just doing his voices or whatever. And I got caught up in it, and I said, "Holy shit, this is awesome!" And that's kind of like I don't do enough audio or listen to enough audio. I have started again,
Yeah.
but man, if you can sit down and listen to an audiobook with a great, narrator or I don't know, what do you guys call yourselves? Is that what you guys call yourselves?
Narrator. Yeah.
Audio actor, voice performer.
No, narrator.
Yeah.
Narrator. I think sometimes I've kind of started putting, if it's fiction,
Yeah.
I'll put performed by, because
Right.
fiction more so than anything I'm performing. But narrator, it's narrator. Yeah, keep it simple.
I like that. That's good. No, because what you guys do, it is performance, Like
Yeah.
I listened to the podcast you did with Godfrey, and listen to you guys go back and forth and talking about doing characters and everything,
Yeah.
and it's incredible. And when I've heard like the Land of Bone stuff is awesome. Everybody in there, I've listened to all of them except for the Rooster, which is the one I wrote about my brother that passed away.
Okay.
The guy, I don't remember who else does which stories, but the guy that did the Rooster, he read the first line of my story and my eyes watered up.
Oh,
I said,
man.
"No, pause, stop. I'm not listening. I can't listen to this one. I'm sure it sounds good, but I'm gonna just skip to the next one."
Yeah.
Which is weird. I didn't expect that to happen. I was totally gonna listen to it, and it hit me.
Yeah.
Like just hearing him say something that was from my heart, from my head, whatever. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
no, I'm not ready to listen to this.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is a different experience, the audio versus reading. And some people prefer just reading it, which is great. The audio, I always look at an audiobook as an option, as another option. And I was driving quite a bit before COVID, before we're all working from home. And so I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and as I was working in the office. I don't as much anymore because I'm home all the time. I got the kids running around. Every time I move, I swear, someone needs something. So I can't
Yes.
I can't be closed off listening. So I'm reading books more, like bound paperback books, some hardbacks. So I'm not listening as much but it is a different mindset. It's a different, you almost can get different things out of each version of the story, just because the narrator will put kind of, their own kind of interpretation of the events, their own emotion. Whereas if you're reading it yourself, you'll kind of put yourself in reading on paper or Kindle. It's easier to put yourself in the shoes, so I don't know. It's fun that there's options, and it just depends where we're at, what I'm doing, if I'm going to listen or not. But definitely, having emotion come through that way that's pretty. I don't know. I haven't thought about how a narrator can affect, can bring a story to life even more. For something as personal as that story is. Was it Rooster? Right? How personal that is to you. That's pretty fascinating. That can happen.
I was a little surprised. It caught me off guard totally. And I was at work. I work at a hotel, and with COVID, it's pretty slow. So there are plenty of hours at work where I can just pull up these files on the computer at front. I got to be careful with my stuff because there's some crazy stuff going on in some of the stories. But I can hear people coming down the hall. But I put that one on, and I was just not prepared at all for what
Yeah.
how that was going to affect me. And
Yeah.
I didn't, it was awesome. I mean, I haven't listened to it, but I'm sure it's great. But
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a cool thing. Is I like emotions. I'm a pretty emotional fella, so
Yeah. Nothing wrong
I
with
like.
that. I am too, and I try to channel that into the narration that I do. And I'm sorry to hear about your brother. I have I've suffered loss. My brother-in-law passed away too many years ago now. So I've been there and I get it. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I understand like how something like that can just trigger an emotion because it happens to me and my wife all the time. So
Right.
so there's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean it's great. It's great that even just that small portion that you heard was able, that means that means it's the narration has to be good, because if it wasn't, you probably would have stuck
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this
So
is so heavy. So heavy. It's a heavy
yeah,
story, but like
yeah,
the guy nailed it. Like the
yeah,
emotion right there,
yeah,
just like a
yeah,
bullet to the heart.
yeah. Well, so your most recent audiobook right now is Blood and Rain, which is a werewolf story, and that's narrated by Phil Thron. And I want to talk a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
This
That
is this
cover.
is the same hand. This is the original. This is the only one I've got left is the original edition.
That
But
cover's great. And man, when you said so the audiobook's using the original cover. There's a different cover for the paperback. And it's weird with artwork and the artwork rights and things like that. I've kind of gone back and forth on
yeah,
things that I've produced trying to get artwork, and luckily I haven't had an artist yet go, no, you can't use that. They may want a little bit of money from me, but I'm pretty convincing. I'm like,
well,
look,
this
man.
was cool because I wanted to get this cover back as soon as Sam Hain was really good. They gave us all our rights back
Okay,
to all of our books pretty quick and easy. We didn't have to wrestle with any of that. But they wanted to charge us for all these covers.
right,
If we
yeah.
wanted our cover art back, we'd have to buy it back from them. And I was like,
Uh,
I loved you guys for all your work, but I'm not buying the cover. No, whatever. And it's been long enough now that Scott Carpenter, who did the art and did a lot of Sam Hain stuff, Joe had a relationship with him because they'd work on a couple of other things. And I told Joe, well, Scott said we got to get in touch with so and so. And Joe said, well, I'll hit him up. And Joe hit him up and got the cover. And then I hit him up and said, hey, can I use it? So I did. The paperback now has that same cover.
nice.
So I put out the paperback on my own little publishing. Alien Agenda is my publishing company, which is just tiny, but it's just mostly me and a couple of my friends. But
Yeah.
I put the paperbacks out with me. Joe's got the audiobook, and Cemetery Dance has the ebook.
Okay.
And I get them to switch to this cover too, but they said they were going to keep the cover they've got, which was done by Lynn Hansen. So that's a cool cover too. But
They're like, look, we paid for our cover. I'm sorry, we got to use it. We paid for it.
right, yeah. I don't know, whatever. But I'm just happy to have it back for the
Yeah.
paperback. It's so cool. I've always loved that.
It's a very very cinematic.
Yeah.
Cinematic. You just feel you're like, okay, I'm in. We got a moody werewolf story. So tell me about the plot of Blood and Rain. So I'm a sucker for werewolf stories. I was trying like hell to narrate The Howling because the company that I've worked with had the rights to it, but they
Right.
wanted to. They got the owner of the estate. They wanted an actor from Hollywood, so that's what happened. Uh, but I love a good werewolf story. So tell me a little bit about Blood and Rain.
Blood and Rain. Well, it started off. Remember, I told you I write these stories. I get a crazy idea. I remember watching. I think I went and saw Underworld
Uh-huh.
movie theater. So this was years ago. Uh, and when I came back to the house, this is back when I was still writing songs. I remember just thinking. I think I had recently read Cycle of the Werewolf too, Stephen King. Yeah, I do that all the time.
Someone came in the office. I had to mute my mic real quick, but you heard me. Dang it! I was trying to be sneaky.
I do it anytime I do one of these. It's usually my son is running through
Always.
the door. But yeah, like I came up with I was sitting there and I'm like, there needs to be more werewolf stories. And at the time, I'm sure there's a ton of them out there. I just didn't know But in that moment, I'm like, I would write one, be a small town, be a sheriff, and his daughter, and I don't know. It's just these characters kind of came to me a little bit, and this was way before I actually wrote the book. I think I scribbled down some notes or something in one of my songbooks, and kind of held on to it for a while. And then when I started dabbling with short stories, I wrote this other werewolf scene, which turns out to be the opening chapter, or the first chapter, because there's a prologue now too, which I wrote afterwards. But see, this is what happens when I talk about this book, because everything in there seems so important to me that my wife's like, listen, when I pitched this book, I pitched it to Don Doria.
How'd you pitch it? Give us the pitch.
At a World Horror Con. No, the pitch was horrible too. It's like ramble on and about this character and that character. My wife, the night before I did the pitch, I told my wife Megan, I said, I've never done a pitch. I've got to try to figure out how to tell them this story. And she goes, well, tell it to me, and I'll tell you, what you need and what you don't need. I start telling her all the stuff, and she's like, is the waitress at the diner is she a main character? And I said, no, but she's important to me. She's like, no, you're going all over the place. And I was like, well, so I don't know how I got through it. Actually, I know I scribbled down, we went over it took us a couple hours for me to whittle this down.
Yeah.
It's a small town in Maine that I made up, Gilson Creek, which happens to be my cousin's last name, Gilson. So I just use that. And there's a sheriff and his daughter, the main characters, Sheriff Joe Fisher. And it turns out he's battled werewolves before. So the story kind of goes back and forth a little bit. And you find out who the main werewolf is at the beginning of this book, which some people really like, and some people, I think a couple people, I remember seeing a couple of reviews that they didn't like that. I just told them right up front who the werewolf is, and I'm like, well, this
isn't some noir.
It's like, oh, the werewolf. This is my own book. Yeah, I'm like, just wait until he attacks people, and you'll be happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the sheriff and his daughter. Anyways, the sheriff took over for the old sheriff, who is the main werewolf, and it's kind of like I'm trying to think how to tell you this. It's so crazy. I haven't had to talk about exactly how this book goes in a long time. But the old sheriff, he retires because he's a werewolf. No one else knows at this point. He's attacked a couple of people. He wants to get away from his town. He decides he's going to go to check himself into like the loony bin. He says, I'm losing my mind. He tells his deputy at the time, which turns out to be the Joe Fisher. And so he kind of like takes himself away from town, goes to Augusta, which is the real city up here that had a mental health institute, and gets himself in there, and they sedate him with drugs and all this other stuff. And that kind of helps control the beast a little bit. So that's kind of how it starts up. And then he comes home finally after like 7 years, I think is the time frame in there. 7 years after his attacks, he comes home. And he kind of lives on the outskirts of town. He's kind of become a recluse, like not messing with anybody. Doesn't talk to the new sheriff at all anymore, even though they were really close before he left. He's just trying to keep to himself. But then, these attacks start happening. And then the story starts rolling, as they do. And I don't want to give away too much of it. But
yeah, no, it's great. It's great.
Because I will. I'll just tell you everything that happened.
So would you say this is would this be like a slasher, werewolf slasher?
Yeah, I mean, it starts off with a bunch of attacks. Then there's the little, they've got a month before the next one, so you get some more character building stuff.
Right.
All that in the middle, and then when it hits, when the shit hits the fan near the end, it just fucking burns.
Awesome.
That's how I love to do all my books, like with the ending. I like it. Yeah. I always tell people I like to make it like I've laid out this, this track of gasoline, and I'm just throwing the match down and just watch it go right to the fucking explosives at the end,
There you go. Would you say that your writing in horror fiction is it informed by, because we're, both of us are kind of, I'm assuming you're a child of the 80s a little bit, 80s horror for sure. are you informed by movies? I mean, you know, uh, I read books before. I read the books of the movies that I couldn't watch the novelizations. If they were R-rated movies, I would find the novelization. But books were kind of my way to dabble in horror because I wasn't allowed to watch them. What informs your writing more, or film, movies that you love, or books, or is it a conglomeration?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix for me. I'm sure in my brain, all these setups, like the basic outline of what it's supposed to be, not necessarily what I'm gonna do, but I know what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
If you're gonna fuck with it, you've got to know what it's supposed to be first, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, especially like that goes back to like my vampire story, because my vampires can go out in the daytime. It makes them weak. Their powers aren't as strong. They don't live forever. They age like normal people. So I know how it's supposed to be. I know the vampire rules or whatever, but I didn't
Yeah.
care because I wanted it to fit into my story, which takes place in a beach town in Maine during the summer. So they can't be only out at nighttime. Um, but I mean, I definitely grew up in the 80s watching, especially the later 80s, watching these movies with my two of my friends. I grew up in a trailer park. So I had one guy lived a couple houses, trailers that way. The other guy was this way. We'd take turns watching. They had always had the movies. I didn't, my
Yeah.
brother would watch movies, but he usually wouldn't let me hang out with him. So, he'd tell me to fuck off or whatever. So I'd go watch with my friend Paul or my other friend down the other end. And they watched some of the craziest shit. Like that's why I saw Chainsaw Massacre for the first time, and that scared the bejesus out of me. Now
Yeah.
it's like one of my favorite movies, but that first time, I remember the first time seeing that, it
Oh
fucked my
man.
brain up.
Man, the scene for me is when Leather, he clocks the girl over the head or whatever. She falls down. He slams the door. Right, his first kind of shocking reveal.
Yes,
Oh
yeah,
my god.
yeah. Well, they got me right at the beginning when it's that stupid picture, that sound, and it shows you the guy that's on. They impaled him or something on
Yeah.
something in the cemetery. That
Yeah.
like seeing that scene with that music, with those sounds.
Yep.
Fuck, man, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this. And that was right at the beginning. And I have a story in Slush that touches on that a little bit actually, because it was really impactful for me. I just remember thinking, I don't want to look like a pussy, but I said, I gotta stay here and I've gotta. I don't want to stay here, but I have to. And so I kind of made myself watch that movie. I'm glad I did now, but
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. As kids, as with me and you, and I know some of my writing buddies, those movies are huge, and we've seen them a million times. So those are kind of like maps in our head that
Mm-hmm.
that we have, and then we just fuck with it in our own way. And that probably comes from, for me, I remember reading Richard Lehman really opened the door for like how crazy you can be, not necessarily gore wise, but just off the wall, bizarre stuff like the
Yeah.
Beast House books, like the beast with the penis with a teeth in it or something. Like, I was like, what? And I remember I told my wife, she told me to stop telling her about these books after I told her that one. But
Yeah. My wife doesn't want to hear about any of the books that I'm reading or any of the movies I'm watching.
yeah,
She's like, you just keep that to yourself.
yeah, we used to sit down at like Denny's or whatever, and that would be one of the things we would go back and forth with what we were reading.
Oh,
And
okay.
my story started getting to like Raymond or something. I know now which ones I can tell her about, which ones to just leave her alone with,
Yeah.
or without. So that was one of them. But I think the leisure books, just how wide open it was. Movies
Yeah.
were pretty open too, but they all kind of seemed to have sort of the same outline to them, anyways. But
Yeah.
books are a totally different beast, and it was definitely those books that made me want to write. And I'm sure the movies, which we still watch now all the time,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
So yeah, definitely both.
Well, because movies are visual, so movies have to kind of hit these visual beats. Because if you have too much exposition going on in a film, the audience is like, the film starts dragging. So there's this like struggle between the exposition and the action and the characters and things going on, because it's a visual audio, it's the whole shebang. Whereas like books, you kind of have a captive audience, and normally if I'm reading a book, I'm more patient than I would be if I'm watching a film. Because I
Yeah,
know, like,
absolutely.
because there'll be, certain books will expand on a character that it may be a character set up for fodder. Like, this character is probably going to die by the end of the chapter, but this whole chapter is about this character, And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I love that stuff. That's what I love about books, is because you really get into, especially horror books, and especially ones with a body count, when the author will kind of, either the character, they're a bit, maybe they deserve to die, maybe they're a creep, but at least you know something about this person, like on a deep level, because
You feel something, whether it's you
yeah,
are disgusted with them or you want them to succeed or whatever. But
yeah,
that's the fun part. And what happened with is going back to Blood and Rain, which is good since it's the latest audio release from me. I was lucky and fortunate enough to have one of my favorite writers take a peek at that.
mm-hmm.
My first 3 chapters, it was, again, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I needed validation from somebody. And I said, at the time, I'm like, who cares? So I'm going to ask this guy. And if he tells me to get lost or doesn't respond, whatever, I don't have
Yeah.
anything to lose. I'm just going to ask him anyways. And he said, yeah, I'll send it over. It was only 3 chapters. And he read it and he said, well, this first chapter, is a good kill scene, but it feels like a horror movie. I don't know anything about that guy, so I don't really care about him. And that was my first lesson, was like, even if you're going to kill them, like you said, in that same chapter,
Mm-hmm.
you need to bring them to life before you can kill them.
Yeah.
And I've kept that. That's been, with everything since then.
Yeah.
And that was, it was actually Ronald Malfi that told me that. Like,
Okay.
I reached out to him a long time ago. We've been friends since then. But I mean, you could tell me to fuck off, but he gave me that great advice and said, yeah, I like it, but you need to do this. And I did, and have been doing that since. And
even
you can't be afraid to ask for help and
oh no, I mean,
take all the advice you can get.
Totally. And when I started doing the narration, I bugged everyone who would give me the time of day. And Joe Hempel, we've talked about it quite a bit on this podcast, and he was huge and kind of, he treated me like I would treat somebody asking for help, and we just became friends. And, someone from the early on, I was like, just give it to me straight. Don't sugarcoat anything at all.
Exactly.
Let me know, what's good, what's bad. And and he's not a coach, and I'm not paying him. I'm like, your time is valuable. So if I'm getting in the way of your time, let me know. But he was very gracious with everything. Him and a couple, Matt Godfrey is another one who was, and Travis Baldry, like those 3 gentlemen were very generous with their time, and some with a newbie like me. And I'm, but about the characters, like even in movies, the best movies, Scream comes to mind, where Drew Barrymore's in the beginning, and it's almost a cheat because we like Drew Barrymore,
Right.
and we're like, there's not going to kill Drew Barrymore. But even through that scene, you get to like her a lot, and just her on the phone. Some movies do it well, some don't. But it's but like I said, like books, you almost have even more time to play, to get kind of pull people along, and either the character's gonna live or they're gonna get axed. But generally, like, there's no impact. Just like with certain movies with high body counts, just if a bunch of characters die, who cares?
Right.
I just watched Monster Hunter, and it's like, I don't care about any of the characters. They gave us no time with any of the characters at all. So you don't care, and it's kind of storytelling 101. But I feel like
you get away with it. You get away with it a little bit more with movies because of all the visuals, and a lot of times that's what you're there for, is to see that. This is
What's
Axel,
up?
by the way.
What's up?
Story. You're right. You don't care about any of the characters. The murderer is killed most of them, and then me, Alex, and Ramona are the only survivors.
He's been writing. He's been working on his own story.
All right, we have him take over.
With Death in Space.
Death in Space. He's got Death in Space.
Okay, space horror, good.
And the Manlador is his other one.
Awesome.
It's kind of a werewolf and something else. What was it?
It was this weird werewolf that has like 3 heads, and then I think it has 18 mouths.
18.
Yeah,
he's pretty scary. Anyways, you don't want to miss it. You don't want.
I mean,
yeah,
I don't want
to jump on the rocket ship, so now it's on planet Earth. He thinks the guy's dead.
Are you talking about Death in Space or The Man in the Door?
Death in Space. Death in Space, the poor dude, he can't see. The man in the door just did this to his space helmet.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know where he gets these creepy ideas from.
Man, I have no idea.
I think it's his mother.
No.
All right, buddy, let me finish this interview.
Maybe
YouTube. That's awesome. All right, well, we'll be looking for his books here in about, 10 years?
I have thought about it. I've thought about, like, if I could somehow... Because his sisters have also come up. They also want to write something. So I'm like,
yeah, that's great, man.
Because I got my own little publishing thing. Even if just, I combine a few of their stories together and want something to put out, I think it would be kind of cool. It's an idea I've worked with. But I've got tons of ideas and tons of projects in mind. But like time to...
That's the thing, man. So many things we want to do, but so little time. And my daughter, so I used to draw quite a bit, and she draws, and I'm into horror and books, and so she's reading a lot of horror books and drawing a lot of monsters and things like that. It's awesome when you see your kids, and I don't force anything on anybody, but it's awesome when they kind of pick up certain elements of your personality and they go and run with it and even do a better job. Like my daughter is like so much better of an artist than I was at that age. And I'm looking at this stuff, I'm like, wow, it's incredible. So no, it's cool to kind of have these little pieces of ourselves running around with developing the personalities and their own creativity and stuff like that. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to start wrapping up here. We've talked about Land of Bones, Blood and Rain. I wanted to hit some other books that if people like Blood and Rain, if they liked Land of Bones, what are some other books that you would recommend that people should be checking out?
My books or other people's books?
Your books.
My books?
Yeah, promote yourself.
This one right here.
There you
Buy
go.
this one. This one, you guys want this one. If you guys, there's a dedication in the front of this. It's a Lost Boys dedication. So if you guys enjoyed the Lost Boys, this isn't like a rip off or anything, but it's got a feel. It's more the feel in the story. It's got a Lost Boys vibe to it. The story is completely different, but
so for the listeners, until summer comes around.
Until summer comes around, I'm a huge Lost Boys fan. So
oh man, dude, that was one of my first legit horror movies that I watched at a friend's house.
I think me too. I saw that. Children of the Corn were like the first two I saw, and I love both of those, and they both scared the shit out of me when I was
so there's just children that are corn. Yeah.
No, it's not children. He hasn't seen that one. I showed him Maximum Overdrive.
Okay.
When he was 4. That was a mistake.
I was petrified. Daddy thought I liked it because of how much I talked about it. I was just constantly talking about it because of how scared I was.
Yeah, I traumatized him a little bit with that one by accident.
You'll be okay. I traumatized my kid with a movie called Big Ass Spiders. And he was younger, and he ran out of the room.
Big spiders.
Yeah.
All right, spiders. Let me finish it.
All the parents watching this are going, okay, we get it.
This is what quarantine is still a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's still a little quarantine life.
Normally, my 8-year-old's the one crashing the podcast, so this is great having someone else having another kid that's not mine crash the podcast.
He turns 8 next week, so
yeah. He seems very, very similar to mine.
Yeah. That Until Summer Comes Around, Lost Boys, that kind of thing. And I have another book coming out this summer called August Eyes, which is weird. It's my first time I have a serial killer involved in the story a little bit. I don't know, but I haven't even figured out how I'm going to describe this story to people because it's not like anything else I've written. I mean, it sounds like it's my voice. If you've liked my stuff, I think you're going to like this one a lot too. And I like that it's a lot different. It was harder for me to write because it's got a little bit of this guy goes into these dreams and there's these characters in the dreams that are recurring. And something from his past that he's life took him one way and he completely forgot about this traumatizing thing in his past and that's involved in it. And
August Eyes, the one where he
and Axel actually came up with one of
The
the
spiders that come out of the book.
the scene that I said I have to put that in the book because I was telling him. I don't know why I was telling him about the story, but I was, and he actually helped me come up with one of the scenes in there.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So he has a little journal that he writes on, and he draws two eyes. Except when he doesn't. He opens a page, and I think he goes to get something. He comes back, two eyes are drawn, and then he looks at it, and there's 1,000 spiders start baby, the tiny little poisonous spiders come crawling out.
Yeah, it's set up sort of like that in the book. Yeah, these spiders coming out of this
That's
notebook.
awesome.
I also tried to give him an AK-47.
He loves army stuff and guns and tanks and everything else, this guy.
So funny. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff coming up down the road. I'm doing 3 novellas for Silver Shamrock.
Okay.
One of them is almost finished, but they're going to kind of stagger out over the next year and a half, 2 years or whatever. They're also putting out a short story. My next short story collection comes out at the end of the year. That one's called Nocturnal Pursuits. I think that's coming out in November, end of November.
Awesome.
So,
awesome.
And then there's the splatter western. I'm writing a splatter western for Death's Head Press too.
Awesome.
But that's down. That's sometime next year. That'll be out too.
I'm supposed to. I keep saying this. I'm supposed to narrate Magpie Coffin, and I'm like trying to get time to it because I want to get to it, but I had some publisher stuff come in that it's paid per finished hour up front, so I got to do the publisher stuff first. But I keep pushing it back, and I'm like, I feel awful because dude, it's such a good book, and the splatter westerns are so great, and I want to narrate more. So
that book is so good. I read it. I don't think I was about a quarter of the way through that book, and I said, I have to write one of these. I have to do it. And I started writing. I kind of just started making notes about my own story.
Yeah.
As I was reading this, I was my other side of my brain's thinking about my own story.
Yeah.
But it was that good. It just inspired me to want to have to do that. I couldn't. Yeah. It wasn't a matter of choice anymore. I had to do it. So I've got that one started, and then I set it aside because I've got to finish some of these other projects first. But that's.
Man, so many like me, so many projects and just so little time. I mean, I was when I was auditioning for it, because Jared was like, "Hey, you want to do a splatter western?" And I said, "Yeah, heck yeah, I want to do a splatter western." And he goes, "Well, what about Magpie?" I go, "Okay, cool." And I reached out to the author. I'm having a brain freeze. Wiley Young, and I go, "Hey, so this is first person. How did you imagine the character?" And he, of course, said, I forget his name. He's he's the guy that goes like, "Why not a spoon, cousin? Why not a knife or a dagger?" Like that guy in the Robin Hood movie.
Okay, that's
that actor. So I have to he's like, that's what I was thinking of, and I'm like, that guy's voice is so deep and gravelly, and I'm like, so I'm gonna try, but we'll see. I may have to do. But we're definitely gonna kind of, we're gonna grit it up a bit and kind of narrate. I walked through there,
such a great character.
Oh man, so I'm excited to get to that one. I keep going blurry here. There you go. But yeah, that's great. I mean, all these awesome horror authors are doing these splatter westerns. Brian Smith's working on one right now.
Christopher Rusty is working on one.
Good stuff. That's a thing. That's this subgenre that I never even thought of. But I mean, there's been horror westerns, a few, and I've loved them. But as a books, I mean, it's just like, man, they really Death's Head Press, just really nailed it with these and the concept, the cover art, everything. And,
God, that artist, Justin Coons, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Fuck, he's
so
awesome.
Good.
But I remember when I started writing mine, I said, I don't even, I'll submit this to them if I can.
Yeah.
I don't know them. I didn't know them at all. I didn't have any relationship with them. And I started writing it, and I said, I'll put it out with them if I get a chance. But if not, I'll put it out myself because I can do my own. But I mean, that as soon as I saw the next couple come out, I was like, no, it's got to be with these guys. Has to. And I was lucky enough that I knew somebody that knew them, and I talked to them, and they said, "Oh, let me talk to them and see if I'll tell me you're working on something." And then they got a hold of me, and now we're signed up and ready to go. So
good stuff. Good stuff.
But yeah,
All
like
right.
you said, who would have thought? Who would have thought like it would be so awesome? I mean, I think it was the fear of like I don't write westerns, so I don't have any place to be writing westerns.
Yeah.
But then once you saw Wiley Young do it, it was like, oh, we can do this. We can totally do this. So,
I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 just to kind of get in that feel. And then I have a stack of Western movies that I'm going to start watching to get in that feel. So for the Cyberpunk, I watched The Matrix, I watched Ghost in the Shell, the animated and and the live action with Scarlett Johansson. And it read, so I'm excited to kind of start binging on all these Westerns. So, yeah. Well, I gotta start wrapping up because I'll just keep on rambling. That's how it goes. But Glenn, thank you so much for joining me and talking about your books and horror in general. And this is why this podcast exists, just to kind of try to shed the light on like horror fiction, and things like that. Because I feel like we're kind of we're hitting another boom in the horror fiction. There's just so much good stuff out there, and it's out there. There's so many good authors. If only the only like leisure books, those types of publishers can come back and we all start building up our shelves with a little mass market size paper.
I know those are my favorite ones, man. Those are my favorites still to this day. Like if I hold one of those,
something about it
feels so comfortable. It feels perfect. Like I wish that these books were. I mean, they're beautiful still, like they are these trade paperbacks, but I just wish they were all the mass market ones.
Yeah.
It would be really cool to see them in the Barnes & Noble and the new paperback arrival shelf,
right?
Too.
Something about a bookstore that you can't replicate online. That's for sure. Well, I guess that's going to do it for this episode. Glenn, thank you for joining me, and we'll talk to all of you listening or watching next time. Bye-bye.